So I want to welcome you all after I hope not a too long night. So today we have a couple of talks. We had three, but at the end it's going to be two talks. So we're going to start with Christina Archer, who is director of the Center of Research in Wind at Delaware University. So please, let's welcome Christina Archer for her talk. And please, you can stand on over here. Oh, yeah, here. Sorry, I was looking for you. So you may.
Thank you. Can you make it into presenter view or?
Yeah.
All right, good morning, everybody. You can't imagine what a pleasure it is to be here today. You will understand what I mean in a few minutes. I want to talk to you about the phenomenal airborne wind energy resource. So you've all talking about, your controls, your rigid wings, soft wings. Here I'm going to talk about the wind, which is what you need to make energy in this case. And it's pretty fantastic how much the resource is actually, how abundant and fantastic the resource actually is. But before we go into details, I want to talk a little bit about the history of this conference. And even the name Airborne Wind was actually an intentional decision. The very first conference that I organized in 2009 was actually high altitude wind power. That was the name of airborne wind energy. So it was HOP. And the first conference, I actually organized it in 2009 at the California State University campus where I was then. And that's the logo of the conference. I actually made that logo myself. I mean, that's how funny it is. And I went back to some old stuff. I found actually the program of the very first conference. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. And at that time, I literally knew every single startup on airborne wind energy. Some names I've highlighted in here, and you may or may not recognize them. So we have Sol Griffith, come give a talk. We had Makani, Magen Power, Sky Mill, Windlift, Swiss Sky Power, Politecnico di Torino, you name it. And sadly, I believe that none of these companies are actually operating today. And this is not like history. This was 15 years ago, not that long ago. But the environment has changed quite a lot, which is interesting. These are some photos from that day, some of the participants, and that's myself there. Apparently, I received a plaque saying that I was an important contributor to HOP, high altitude wind. I still have that in my office today. And I actually brought you some more historical stuff if you wish. It has to be a little fun, right? So, stay tuned. All right. I think I'm gonna wear this all day. We had a t-shirt. What is this? Lift to you only. To you all, actually. So it was kind of fun. Let's see. Actually, yes, I almost forgot. We were very intentional with our press, so we invited everybody that we could find. And the day after the conference, we made the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. And so that is actually the front page with inventors float ideas to tap wind's power. And there were some designs. I'm sorry for the poor quality. I spent literally 2 days to try to get the original version of the San Francisco Chronicle. The library helped me, and they sent me the text without the figures. No, I want the actual front page. So this is as good as I could find it for you. But it was kind of like a pretty exciting thing. So the first conference on airborne wind was actually not airborne, was HOP. So it's kind of cool. Then I found more stuff for your entertainment. So the consortium, basically, the Airborne Wind Energy Consortium was born after that conference. So it was the very first time that the startups came together. Everybody was super protective of their IPs. So they had never talked to each other, never. So there were some 15 companies that came. And they all eventually presented a little bit, and they had the same problems, acceptance and, insurance and flight permits and you name it. And they started to realize, well, we have the same problems, why don't we get together and try to, be a stronger force, a stronger voice if we get all together. So they found the Airborne Wind Energy Consortium. So AWEC, which now is Airborne Wind Energy Conference, was actually Airborne Wind Energy Consortium. And then, it became a conference. And I even found the book of abstracts of the 2010 conference, which was this thick compared to today. It gives you an idea of how much you guys have moved forward, and it's just been fantastic. So I just want to thank Roland, whom I don't see today, for inviting me. Yes, and I haven't done much on airborne wind energy lately, so I'm going to show you some of my early studies. As I was saying today, the wind hasn't changed that much, so hopefully they're still valid. And again, I'm very, very excited and happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Okay. Oh. And I believe I collected all the logos of the conferences that have followed after that one, and even some photos that I have. And yeah, I can't believe it. It's great. Okay. Now, let's go back to some meteorology and some nerdy stuff. So the paper that I wrote in 2009 was kind of important because it was a comprehensive evaluation of the wind resource at many levels. So at that time, the hub height of turbines was 50 to 100 meters, let's say. 80 was the most common one. So there were a lot of maps and atlases on the 80-meter wind resource. But, we're interested in, 200, 400, 500, 1 kilometer. Actually, we were interested even in 10 kilometers for potential airborne wind energy devices. There was one that actually aimed at the jet streams. And so I did some work like this. So on the left, and I'm sorry I'm turning that way, but usually this is on. So on the left, we did the analysis at 80 meter, the traditional height. And on the right, you can see, for example, the 10,000 meter resource as an example. And the colors are such that you can actually compare. So the first row is the 50th percentile, which means it's the wind power density that I can guarantee to be exceeded 50% of the time, and then 68% of the time in the second row, and 95% of the time. So it gives you an idea of how reliable your resource is. So again, if you look at 80 meters at 50%, okay, sure, there's a lot of land that has a good resource. But once you want more reliability, I want to produce wind not just 50% of the time, maybe 68% of the time. Then the white, which is the no wind or not good resource, starts popping up everywhere on land. And once you get to the 95th percentile, basically there is no place on Earth except perhaps the Horn of Africa where you can guarantee some consistency of the wind. And the best locations, let's say at 50%, in North America, you can see the central part of the country in the US where there's a lot of wind, the famous mecca of wind energy. And you can see the color is like a blue, so maybe 0.2, 0.3 kilowatts per square meter. You might be used to meters per second for just the speed of the wind. Here I'm taking into account air density as well. So I'm speaking of watts per square meter. And the square meter I'm referring to is typically the area swept by a turbine. So it's the area perpendicular to the wind. So, if you're lucky, you get 0.2, 0.3 kilowatts per square meter. Now you go to the jet stream on the right-hand side, and you can see that basically you get that on the worst today. So 95% of the time, you can guarantee in half of the land in North America that value that is like a dream at 80 meters. And the higher the percentile, then you can get astronomical values like 1 kilowatts, 2 kilowatts, 3 kilowatts at the jet stream. And you can imagine that it's somewhere in between at different altitudes. And by the way, these densities that I'm throwing at you as if it's not a big deal, just as maybe a comparison, if you think of the sun, right? The sun, the solar constant is about 1.4 kilowatts per square meter on top of the atmosphere when the sun is at the right angle. By the time you get to the Earth's surface, on average, maybe 300 watts per square meter. That's from the sun. And we are talking about value of 0.2, 0.5, so higher. So these are, it's an incredible amount of energy if you think about it. So the sun is what drives the wind, but the wind is such that sometimes we get more energy than what the sun can actually give us. So it's pretty incredible. You can also do vertical profiles where you look at the density as a function of height. And the global average maybe is not super interesting, but you can look at some locations that are particularly windy. And for example, if you look at New York, again, with this idea of 50, 68, 95, you can see that you can get incredible values at, say, 8 to 10 kilometers. We're talking about 8 kilowatts per square meter. There is nothing on the Earth's surface, no fast river that you can think of, no natural resource that has such an incredible energy density, or energy density, let's say. It's not exactly energy density, but something like that. So it's really cool. But another interesting feature was that definitely from 80 meters to even 200 meters, you get a lot of gains. But between, let's say, 500 and 2,000, you're on the order of maybe half of a kilowatts per square meter. You don't get that much gain. So if you look at the vertical profiles, again, between 500 and 2,000, it doesn't look like there's that much gain. And so the idea was maybe the airborne devices, once you get to 500, you don't need to go 4 times higher. 500 seems to be a good enough. But there are some exceptions. And these exceptions I'm going to call low-level jets, LLJ. It's not technically a correct term. So low-level jets are a very, very specific phenomenon in meteorology. But here I'm referring to low-level jets as wind speed maxima, basically, a location where the wind speed increases with height first and then it decreases. So you have a semi-jet at lower elevations. In particular, I'm interested in something below 2,000 meters to see if maybe there are some locations where you have a micro-jet stream, let's say, near the Earth's surface. And typically, they form at nighttime, and I'm going to show you why it tends to be that way. And they have a peak usually that is lower than 500 meters. So let's see if that's useful for airborne wind energy. And they can get super geostrophic. So they can be faster than the geostrophic wind speed, which is very, very useful. And the problem is that with the resolution that I used for 2009 for the global atlas, which was about 2 degrees of latitude and longitude, you can't resolve them because they are local features that you need to have the topography and the land use accurately to resolve. And I got my hands on an incredible database so that I could do that. But in brief, a low-level jet, if you can plot the UNV components of the wind, and at the top of the boundary layer, you have the geostrophic wind. So it's the big arrow. Maybe I can point. I guess not. So the big arrow that you see there is the geostrophic wind above the boundary layer. And at the surface, of course, you have no wind. So in the presence of friction, you have this rotation, clockwise rotation of the winds as you move up higher and higher. Very well-known Ekman spiral kind of effect. But at nighttime, when the friction suddenly kind of goes away, the turbulence decays, what happens is, and it's very hard, it's super cool. So you kick in some sort of an instability by which the wind kind of pulsates. It basically, the tip of the vector makes the round trajectory. So it first accelerates and then comes back, and there's a frequency by which it does that, which has been studied. But the cool thing is that it's at nighttime when the friction dies, and you can get super geostrophic wind speeds below the top of the boundary layer. So if your device now can reach those heights, it can get wind speeds unheard of, basically, without needing to exceed the height of the boundary layer. So your tether can be much, much shorter if you can tap into that. And so, as I said, I got my hands on an incredible database at that time, the CFDDA. I don't even know what it stands for anymore. Some kind of defense act. NCAR prepared this database. And they ran these runs at a 40-kilometer resolution for the globe, which at that time was like unheard of. Just downloading that database was like a nightmare, and processing it. And it was hourly and for many, many years. So I was able to get that and post-process it to try to find if these low-level jets maybe were available in a significant part of the planet or not. And so there's an algorithm that I used. I think I can skip it, but the idea was I want to find that maximum that knows where the winds get really fast. And here's an example of what I found. So I have results for July, let's say summertime, and for January, representative of the wintertime in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is, again, the average height where I can find a low-level jet with the properties that I wanted. And the average height is capped at 1,600 meters. So between 90 meters and 1,600 meters, this is how the heights of this nose, this jet, is located. And so the closer to blue and green, the lower it is, and the more desirable, if you wish. But without going into details, first of all, I was shocked at how widespread they are. So it's not a little phenomenon that happens in 1% of the land. I mean, it's almost half of the land has some sort of a phenomenon like this, excluding the oceans, which obviously are less feasible. And I don't trust the results over Antarctica that much. As soon as we get there, I don't know exactly what those things are. But if you look at, for example, North America, you see the strip in the middle of the country where it's well known that we have low-level jets relatively often. And also offshore of California, it's also well known. I was looking for Spain. There was a talk yesterday, and I don't see the speaker. Oh, yes, I was looking for Spain. Like, I didn't have enough resolution to see that, unfortunately. I looked at all my maps, like, no. But, yeah, you probably need finer resolution than 40 kilometers for that. In terms of average wind power density, I mean, the darkest shade of blue is 500 watts, so half of a kilowatts. So that's already better than what I showed you for New York and Tokyo, up to 2 kilometers, and you can get that much lower. And you're going to start noticing the Horn of Africa starts popping up as a region that's particularly interesting, and it's whipping out there. And you can also look at how often this happens. And I had a threshold for 15% or more. And in some locations, this is happening every day in the summertime. Like where you see all that red, it's a frequency greater than 90%. So not only are they more widespread than I thought, lower elevation than I thought, but they're also quite common, especially in the summer. And then you can look at January, and you can do the same for the average height and the frequencies and so on and so forth. But maybe more interestingly, I can look at some case studies. For example, this is the Great Plains, and it's super cool from the meteorological perspective. On the left, I have wind speed, and on the right, I have wind power density, which I kind of prefer for wind. And the colors are such that the red is afternoon and nighttime is black, and you have something in between. And you can see how there is clearly a diurnal cycle. So during the afternoon, the boundary layer is more mixed, and this low-level jet rises up, and it's not super strong, so we get to 900 meters max. But then at nighttime, boom, it comes back down, and you can get 3,000 watts per square meter of density in the Great Plains. And it's a very coherent pattern. You can really see afternoon, evening, night, and it repeats. This is for July. In January, there are less occurrences, so it occurs less often. But look at those densities. I mean, 6,000 at night, commonly in the afternoon, in the late afternoon, evening, and nighttime. So anyway, very, very interesting to look for something like this. In terms of potentials, at that time, there were no power curves available. Are you kidding me? I was asking every single startup, okay, do you have a power curve? Well, maybe something, but... And so the only assumption that I could do was, let's assume an efficiency that's basically half the Betz limit, just to get a value. And so I did some assumptions, and one actually is a conservative assumption. I was assuming that when there's a low-level jet, the device creates energy. When there isn't one, it doesn't, which is not really realistic because you can still produce energy even if you don't have a low-level jet. But anyway, I looked at 3 scenarios of density of devices. The one was 100 square meter of all device per kilometer of land. Now, what exactly do I mean by 100 meters of all device? As you can understand, it's a very vague concept depending on, do you have a sail? Do you have a rigid wing? It's some kind of an equivalent of a rotor spanned area. So that's the best I could do at that time. So 100 meter is a pretty large kite or swept area, you know. It's this lowest threshold that I looked at, and then 1,000 and then 10,000 square meter. And these are kind of like some of the results that I obtained, again, looking at low-level jets only. And just so you understand, these results are in terawatts, okay? 10 to the 12 watts. And in the most conservative scenario, low, with 100 square meter of all device per kilometer square of land, in January or July, you get almost a terawatt of power. I mean, humans' use of electricity today is about 2. The entire world uses about 2.2 terawatts. And just looking at locations with low-level jets, with devices that only operate when there is one, you get half of humanity's electricity needs satisfied. So it's quite incredible. And of course, the higher the density of devices, the higher the potential. These are very back-of-the-envelope calculations. Again, you know, that's the best that I could do in 2013. But still, that's why I call it, it's absolutely phenomenal what we can do. So in summary, the global wind resource generally increases with height, definitely. And there's not that much gain on average between 500 and 2,000 meters. But the low-level jets are this kind of an exception, which is not really an exception because they're kind of widespread as I described. And I didn't go into the details, but the low-level jets that I identified were making a lot of sense when you looked at other global circulation features, such as the location of the intertropical convergence zone that were related to that, the Hadley cell. So it seemed to be a coherent feature, not like a random numerical thing. And so the global wind potential in the low-level jets alone is on the order of terawatts. And so that's it. That's what I wanted to share.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. May we have any questions for her? Anybody? Yeah, please, Christian. Yeah, maybe you want.
Thank you, Christina. I'm Christian Patrick from Airborne Europe. You mentioned in the beginning that the term airborne wind energy was on purpose. So what was the reason why you changed from HOP to AWAC?
It's actually interesting because even during the conference, we had already kind of created this airborne term. In fact, if I go back a few slides, so the short story is that high altitude for pilots reminds them of like the altitudes where the conventional airplanes fly, and they were like it's too high. It has a connotation of too high elevation, and so airborne made more sense. And in fact, if you look, well, I don't know if you can read it down there, but there was a session in the afternoon about questions that we were interested in, and in one of them was in what ways might forming a AWACS association benefit advancement of this new industry. AWAC was already Airborne Wind Energy Consortium something. So we were already thinking about and in fact it was in the program. But the main reason was that high altitude for pilots and aviation, the aviation sector referred to, you know, a stratospheric, basically the stratosphere, and they didn't want to give that connotation to the industry.
Thank you. It's interesting because airborne now works well, but in Germany we had a similar discussion now. It's Flugwindenergie or Höhenwindenergie, and now today in the law they put Flugwind, so flying wind energy. So it's interesting that you had this discussion already at that time.
Thanks, Christina.
My pleasure.
Amazing work. Rod from Windswept, and I'd love a lot more lift in my kites. Do you think there's anything in the convergence of Hadley cells where you've got the areas that are more upbound that would support airborne wind energy systems more readily?
So there's got to be something that explains why some of the low-level jets were exactly there, and there was some co-location between these low-level jets and the intertropical convergence zone. I have not had time to look into that, if that's what you...
Yeah, I was looking more for the vertical component of movement within those convergence zones. Is that...
You mean
is that
capturing the vertical motion
as
with
part
the
of
device?
the Hadley cell interface?
I would guess that the speeds are not strong enough to really...
Because it's
Yeah.
such a wide area.
Yeah, and also in the horizontal, you can, I've been speaking about wind energy densities, so you maybe lose the recognition of the speed, but we're still talking about pretty high speeds, 8 meters per second, 10 meters per second. When you're talking vertical, you're lucky if you get to 1 meter per second. And now the air density is 1 cube is still 1, so you don't get enough energy density to, it's not worth it.
Thank you.
Cool talk. Thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome.
So one sort of geeky question I have is, like in the last 5 or 10 years, we've been finding in multiple modeling fronts, and now finally with observations, especially in Europe, that like when we get fine enough vertically resolved models, we're finding like jets in winter, like the frequency goes up. Like, oh great, like we
Yeah.
have jets, we can
Yeah.
hunt for the jets, but like it's still not very trustable, even out of WRF, even out of the meso models. But what we've also seen is that like when we run stuff in North America, like in the sweet spot, like you showed,
Yeah.
and then say we run in flat parts of Europe, Denmark or something, like things don't always match up right. So I wondered like if you, since 2013 or whatever, like have you, is there any secret to seeing like what's happening, say in wintertime in the US there compared to like what we've been seeing? Because I haven't seen like a explanation yet, and there's not a heck of a lot of observations yet, going up to like 500 meters.
Yeah.
Yeah, people don't put
Do you
ladders
find
in.
anything along the coasts, or is it just over land?
Yeah, well, both. So you have the
Yeah.
coastal jets, right? You have that
Exactly. So
phenomenon.
those get resolved well?
Right, like our Spanish friend there, Miguel,
Yeah.
showed some of
Yeah.
those in northern Spain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But inland as well, yeah. So just nighttime and clear sky jets, 200 meters, 300 meters.
I mean, I'm not too surprised that if you have higher resolution, you see more. It makes sense. And again, the lack of the low-level jet in Spain here at 40 kilometers versus at a few, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And the winter is interesting, right? Because you would think it's more stable, right? It's more stable than the summer. So I'm not too surprised. I mean, it makes a little bit of sense. And remember though that my low-level jets are not necessarily always the Blackadar thing. It's a mix of those features. So I'm glad. The problem though might be that if they're so localized, then you just have to be right there. You can't screw up. It either forms or it doesn't form.
Oh no, this is over like thousands of square kilometers.
Okay.
So and it comes out of Ekman-like solutions in 2D for
Yeah.
RANs and Elias stuff. So
Well,
so that's why I wonder, like,
That's very
have you
cool.
gotten to fine enough resolutions in the U.S. to start getting this stuff? Because we're
that's
still like,
as fine as I did, but there are databases now
Yeah,
that
yeah.
are fine resolution. I'm sorry that I haven't done too much research after this.
no
in
worries. No
Airborne.
worries. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
Okay, maybe last question. Okay, thank you, Miguel.
Miguel Ángel Gardner from University of Castilla-La Mancha. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I have noted that this distribution of low-level jets, in some sense, it's complementary, especially to the conventional wind energy. Conventional wind energy is more mid-latitudes,
Yeah.
mid-high latitudes, and this is more subtropical, even tropical. Is this right?
Obviously, yes, from the geography, as you can see. I think there's also some connections with the monsoon, especially related to the Horn of Africa. There had something to do with that larger scale phenomenon. Other than that, I'm not going to go further than this. Yeah, it's too complex of a question. I don't have a quick answer for you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Cristina,
you. My pleasure.
for showing us the huge resource within airborne wind energy and linking with history. For
Exactly.
those who are new on this topic as myself, thank you very much.
My pleasure.